let's just start the same question. And how do you, solidly upper middle class, maybe Chinese, English educated, how did you get into social work and into social civil activism?
I started out in social work as a social worker for migrant workers. So the reason I wanted to get involved with migrant workers was because I realized, and this was about 15 years ago, I realized that there were just so many of them in Singapore. I was always very curious about, what their concerns were, what were the issues, and I didn't learn all that in school, because the NUS social work program hardly talked about minority rights and minority issues. I mean, they don't really talk about human rights and social justice anyway. So it was really out of curiosity, but also because my family has a living domestic worker, so I kind of knew what it was like to be a domestic worker, having to live with your employer, and then when I was growing up, she shared the same room as I did, and I always thought that was quite, and when I think back, I was like, that must have been quite uncomfortable for her. I mean, she didn't have any privacy, and she had to share a room with a child, and it must have been quite irritating to her sometimes, because I would, of course, being a young child, irritate her and talk to her, and then she had to entertain me and deal with all my nonsense. So I kind of became very sympathetic towards that. So that's how I decided to get involved with Home, which was the organization that was founded in 2004, and then from there I learned a lot about how the system works, and I saw just how dehumanizing, how problematic it was that we didn't have enough protections for the workers, and then I realized that they couldn't even fight for their own rights, because they couldn't sit on the executive committee of the organization. There were rules and regulations saying that if they did anything which were political or socially undesirable, they could be punished, they could lose their employment. So they couldn't even form their own unions. So I realized that civil rights, political rights, the right to assert yourself was something which was denied to them completely. It was a systemic denial of these rights, and yet they were facing all these problems. So that was how I got started and appreciated on a more concrete level what macro and structural problems were. So that was the beginning of my consciousness, when I realized that these people that I was working with, and simple things that I took for granted, like rest days and not having to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, things like that just started to make me realize something was really, really wrong about the situation.
And how did you go from there then to deciding to take a more active oppositional stance? As in, what is the point you decided that you needed to do protests instead of just working with the system, as we're told?
Well, I guess the way which me and my colleagues worked it wasn't just about making noise, right, so to speak. There was a lot of engagement. So we engaged with the government a lot. There were a lot of dialogue sessions, and we talked with partners. So and we tried to change things, from within, through these dialogues, because we felt that, hey, this is really common sense to us. So shouldn't it be common sense to you? But of course we realized that wasn't the case, because power and politics comes into the picture and makes progress difficult. So we worked together collaboratively, to try and push the agenda forward. But then I also, in the course of my journey as a social worker, I also realized it's not just about migrant worker issues, right? So if you believe in human rights, you believe in justice, you believe in human rights and justice for all. And then and freedom of expression, the right to protest, freedom of association, all comes together with that. And I saw the inability to do that as very symptomatic of the authoritarian regime that we live in. So the fact that we can't protest, the fact that our freedom of expression is limited, has also got to do with the fact that our unions are not independent, our media is muzzled, they are not free, they're not independent, they can't publish what they want. So all these things I saw as part of a whole, that needed to be tackled. So that's how then I also became interested in the right to protest and freedom of expression issues, because a lot of it has to do with transparency also and freedom of information. So if we don't have the right to advocate the way we want, if we don't have transparency, we don't have due process, we don't have access to information, then how do we make our society a better place? Yeah, so our social progress is also very dependent upon our civil and political rights. Yeah, so if we as citizens don't feel that we can participate fully in public life, political life, then how are we able to make our communities better?